The Tarleks came from the west, they grooved. White belt shining in the pounding sun. It came from Cincinnati, oh, fanning out across the Central Plains. A car with leather windows, they drive with arms akimbo.
Listen up, fellow babies. It's time for another episode of Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser, the deep dive history nerd WKRP in Cincinnati podcast. I'm Mike Grasso, and with me today, as always, is Rob McDougall.
Hi, everybody.
And guys, I hope you're into Herbert Ruggles Tarlek Jr. because we have a lot of Herb on our plate today.
Wall-to-wall Herb.
It's wall-to-wall. It's wall-to-wall Herb with 2 episodes: Herb's Dad and Put Up or Shut Up. And we're going to start with Herb's dad. We see at the very beginning of the episode a man come into the lobby of WKRP spouting some very familiar catchphrases. And Jennifer is first bemused and then slightly horrified to find out that it is, in fact, Herb's dad.
If you want to see Mr. Carlson, I'm afraid he won't be in for an hour, maybe longer.
A little later, I'm sure I can be honest with you.
What are you selling?
Zuni Indian jewelry. Everybody loves it.
Well, I don't think Mr. Carlson would be interested.
Okay, fine. Don't listen to me, Jenny Pooh.
Jenny Pooh?
Yeah, it's a nice, slow reveal. Who is this guy? And if we knew, if you know what's coming, that his outfit, his suit makes it obvious. And actually, even his physical appearance, he is well chosen. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
But it is a nice, slow reveal as he, drops in, okay, fine, and Jenny Pooh. And,
Yeah, those were great. And then, again, as usually happens when we have a special guest at the studio, they get to kind of run into everybody. Herb Sr. camps out in the big guy's office, unveiling his collection of authentic Zuni jewelry made in Japan.
Right.
And we get the sense that Herb Sr. is a traveling salesman of some kind, maybe not of a quite reputable kind.
Well, how much does a bracelet like this one cost?
Art. How can you put a price on craftsmanship? What do you think it's worth?
Oh, gosh, I don't know.
Say, Art. You really like that one, don't you?
Well,
I knew it. That's one the chief made. Oh, yeah. Boy, I'm telling you, it hurts. I'm gonna let you have that for $20.
just sold, by golly.
No, I must be some kind of a fool, but I'll never forget that you're the one that gave my son a job and nobody else would.
Yeah, definitely kind of a snake oil or Japanese Zuni jewelry type salesman, and he's released himself on his own recognizance from the Shady Hills rest home, a callback to one of their first sponsors in the pilot, I think.
Absolutely, and we see Herb earlier in the episode kind of foreshadowing this by talking to Andy about, Andy wants those ads off the air, but Herb's got a deal, and part of that deal is that Herb Sr. gets to get a room at Shady Hills rest home. And as we've talked about, Herb Sr. likes the road. He was a traveling salesman, and he's not the kind to be pinned down in one place, even though this is Herb trying to take care of his dad after Herb's mom has passed away.
So, what are you doing here? I mean, shouldn't you be at the home with your new friends?
One word. Mucho boredom.
Dad, now look, we have been through all of this before.
I'm not going to go back that place.
Look, we made a deal with Shady Hills. You say you're 70, I run the ads, and they provide you with a very nice place to stay. And at a real bargain. Now, I pulled just about every string I had to put you in there.
Son, I thought I was ready to retire, but I am not.
I'll get the car.
I won't get in it.
I mean, this episode is not a laugh riot, Mike.
No, it's not. The fact that I've now gone deep into the episode and realized that it's all about putting one's dad in a basically crappy rest home. It's not funny.
The tone of the episode is intentionally not a laugh riot. It's kind of, it really is, I think, reaching towards a sort of dramedy style.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fair bit of heart to the episode. But then there's also ways in which maybe unintentionally it just is darker than or harder to watch than intended.
I know what you're thinking.
I bet you don't.
Bet I do. You're thinking that I'm an insensitive, heartless, cruel son who wants to make his life easier by putting his old man away.
It's none of my business, Herb.
You know, Jenny, it's real easy for you to sit there in judgment, thinking that I haven't quite resolved all my conflicts with Dad yet, you know? That he's the great man, and that I never quite measured up to his impossible standard of excellence. Well, you're wrong.
Okay, Herb.
Okay.
This episode ends up being a really good episode for understanding Herb Jr., understanding where Herb comes from.
Yep.
It's not. It's definitely awkward, and it's not a knee slapper. It's not a belly laugher by any means.
When we get to Act 2, though, and we get into the ending of the episode, that's when we start to see Herb's Sr. and Jr. try to work things out.
You know, I always loved your mother. She was a wonderful woman. And her memory is going to live with me forever.
What?
Well, you know, I have needs.
What are you talking about?
Well,
Come on, what?
a nurse, 33, blonde.
Really? Nice going.
Eventually, Herb Jr. just has to realize that his dad can't be contained and that he's going to go to California with this 35-year-old nurse, you know. It's not the kind of thing I think that most sons would do, but Herb Jr. just idolizes his dad so much and just lets him go off on the road, gives him his $1,000 pin money, as he says, and sends him off on his little road trip to California.
A couple of things I thought about the resolution. Bert Parks as Herb Sr. is, I don't know how old he was when the episode was filmed, but he doesn't seem like he needs to be in a home yet. You know,
no, he doesn't. And I think they lampshade that a tiny bit by, you know, him saying, I think he says something about he's not even 70 yet. You know,
Yeah.
and I don't need to be retired. I could still work, that kind of thing.
Right. It's a TV thing. You know, on TV, maybe people just ship their parents, you know, ship Grandpa Simpson off to the home just so they don't have to listen to his stories. But,
Yes.
you know, people go into elder care when they can't take care of themselves and when there are sort of like health reasons why they can't take care of themselves. And you don't get the sense that Herb Sr. is in that situation yet. Maybe you wouldn't know, but you don't get that sense. Herb Jr., or you know, our Herb, has offered to let him stay with with him and Lucille.
That's true.
But obviously that's not going to work out. That's just, you know, that's not in the cards for Herb Sr.
When I think about sort of, you know, could there be a reason why Herb Sr. is in the home? I think a little bit, and you mentioned Lucille, and that's what got me thinking about this, is that he can't seem to remember Lucille's name. Now, whether that's any kind of early onset kind of thing, or whether it's him just being rude about, you know, not liking Lucille. I mean, I think either of those are plausible options, but
yeah, he burns off a lot of goodwill from me by not remembering Lucille's name. I mean, you know, you best not talk shit about Lucille.
Hey, I have a little grandchildren.
They're good.
Good boy. How's Elaine?
Lucille.
Oh, yeah. Good cook.
you know, I mean, I guess that gets down to the next question, which is that, you know, is it a realistic resolution, even in the late 70s, for an older man to, you know, just kind of go off and try to reinvent himself in California, and the son just being kind of, you know, blah about it. I mean, you're right. He doesn't need care, but...
Well, yeah, so, I mean, if he's 68 and spry, then it's not a big deal at all. Go to California. If he's 80 and senile, it's very different.
Yeah, but this is a question I was thinking about watching it. Is 68 a different age in 1980 than it is now?
I see.
And again, the sort of conventional wisdom is that, yeah, you know, 70 is the new 50 and all that. We've heard about, you know.
We were talking about that just just last night, talking about our parents, and, you know, somebody saying, you know, 60 is the new 40 or 60 is the new 50. And my mother-in-law, who I think is in her early 70s, said 80 isn't the new anything.
That's a really catchy slogan. It's sad nobody can use it for anything because nobody wants to hear that, but that's pretty good. But yeah, maybe that is an aspect to this, is that there's an expectation. When you hit 65, you retire, at least in the blue collar 70s that we've been talking about, right? You get your gold watch and you get your Social Security and your pension, and you go off and Herb Sr. was a salesman. He's got no pension. He's got no union. He's got none of that stuff to take care of him. So maybe that's an aspect to this, that, there's also a financial thing. And Herb Sr. definitely loses money pretty easily, as we saw with his time in Vegas getting cut short, which...
Right, yeah, actually, that makes more sense. Maybe the concern is financial more than health. It's just how's he going to live? Where's he going? And so hence Herb's deal with Shady Hills is an attempt to solve the financial problem.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if I'd trust him to go out there, and especially if he was going to get taken advantage of by a younger nurse financially. So watch those palimony laws in California, Herb Sr.
There she is, Miss America. There she is, your ideal, the dream of a million girls who are more than pretty, can come true in Atlantic City, for she may turn out to be the queen of femininity. There she is, Miss America.
So we were just talking about the scenario of Herb Sr. going out to California, and we heard that he didn't do so well in Vegas, and I'm thinking to myself, I want that spinoff of Burt Parks as a Lothario, septuagenarian in Las Vegas. Maybe he's got like a hip streetwise friend who comes out and hangs out the apartment.
Oh, that's good. And of course, his young, good-looking nurse. It's like Suzanne Summers or someone like that. Is
perfect. It makes me think a little bit about. This is a side tangent. The Tortellis with Gene Kaysen and Dan Heddy. But Burt Parks, as you said earlier, Rob, perfect choice to play Herb's unctuous dad, right?
Oh, such a good choice. Yeah. So, to those who don't know, who's Burt Parks?
Oh, Burt Parks. Well, if you remember the Miss America pageants from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you'll remember Burt Parks. He was famous for singing "There She Is, Miss America," and was the host right up until 1979, actually.
Yeah, he hosted it for like more than 20 years. On Wikipedia, he hosted it from 1955 to 1979.
Yeah, and hey, the Miss America pageant, that was the Super Bowl before the Super Bowl. It would get the top ratings of any sort of annual event every year throughout the early 60s before the Super Bowl came along.
Abe, isn't Homer cute?
Probably. I'm trying to watch the Super Bowl. If people don't support this thing, it might not make it.
Big cultural institution. Now, by 1979, it definitely has lost a little bit of its luster and cachet, obviously, because judging a bunch of women on how pretty they are does not fly in the late 70s the way it does in the 50s.
It's a little threadbare and a little un-PC by then. But before we even get to that,
yes.
Parks' career, he was in radio, like all these people. He was in radio even, back in the 40s. And then he was one of the very first TV hosts, the very first host of TV game shows. In fact, I see here that Parks' first game show was Party Line on NBC, his first TV game show, which involved viewers calling in to answer questions and win $5 prizes. And Party Line ran from June to August 1947. So this is how old it is. That there even was TV in 1947.
Wow.
Some people forget. And it's actually one of the oldest surviving television shows to have been recorded. Because I think, television was actually kind of gradually invented in the 20s and 30s by a range of sort of, crazy Russians and Mormons and different people. There's no sort of Alexander Graham Bell figure you can point to and say, this guy invented the television. Right? But there was no way to record television broadcasts until the 1940s. So like again, back to Wikipedia, the only kinescopes known to predate Parks' Party Line are a few episodes of Kraft Television Theater from February 1947. So
wow.
This is as far back as you can go in television and still watch it, you'll see Burt Parks' smiling face asking people to answer questions for $5.
Yeah. Well, hey, $5 2 years after World War II, that's actually not too bad.
Those are $1947. That's right. he's terrific to be Herb's dad, and he even looks like Herb. If you look at an old picture of Bert Parks, you'll see it even more. Like, again, on Wikipedia, if you look at an old picture of Bert Parks, you will totally see Frank Bonner. And Frank Bonner, he said that when he was in high school, he was teased by his classmates about looking like Bert Parks, and they would ask him to sing the Miss America, There She Goes song.
Oh, that's crazy. I did not know that story. That's awesome.
And he's game, too. Like, the fact that, often a guest, for a guest star to come in and then have them say, okay, you have to kind of do an impression of an established character. Okay, fine. And that's he's totally game to do it. So I think that that's the nice thing about it.
Was this Campman and Torquevey?
Yes, it was. Campman and Torquevey,
Did they schedule another episode to meet somebody they wanted to know?
to meet some, it's quite possible. They're just sort of like, what does that say about their, who their idols are? That it's Sparky Anderson and Bert Parks. But actually, Campman and Torquevey kind of fell in love with Herb as a character. So almost every Herb episode from here on out is them. And you remember Jeff talking on the podcast about thinking that WKRP was the Herb show, thinking that it was about Herb. You can almost believe that looking at this week's 2 episodes. But I think for Campman and Torquevey, they really, they admitted they didn't really know what to do with Jennifer, for instance, but they loved Herb as a character and just kept returning to him. Another thing that happened just at the timing of this episode is that in between when they filmed the episode and when the episode aired, after 22 years, Parks was fired or let go from the Miss America pageant, this institution. The Miss America people wanted to try and grab a younger audience somehow. And somehow they convinced themselves that the reason that Miss America was looking a little threadbare in 1979 was not that it's a beauty pageant in Atlantic City, but that maybe if they could get rid of that Bert Parks.
It was the 3rd of September. That day I'll always remember. Yes, I will. 'Cause that was the day that my daddy died. I never got a chance to see him. Never heard nothing but bad things about him. Mama, I'm depending on you. Tell me the truth. Mama just hung her head and said, son, Papa was a rolling stone. Wherever he laid his hat was his home. All he left us was alone.
Now, Herb's dad is not your typical sort of, even at this point, Rob, sitcom father figure.
Yeah, that's right.
He kind of comes out of a traveling salesman world that kind of existed parallel to those 1950s Ward and June Cleaver type households. He's kind of the dad from the wrong side of the tracks in a black and white 1950s sitcom.
And that's where this episode gets a lot of its pathos from, is 2 things. One, it's pretty clear what kind of a dad Herb Sr. was, that he was not there, that he was a traveling salesman, that he was absent, and yet Herb Jr. clearly idolizes him, right, and wants to be him, and we see, this is why Herb is the way he is. He's built himself to be the man that his father is, and he wants his father's approval, and he wants to be like his father. Yeah, I think it's an interesting choice that, in a lot of TV shows, I could imagine the resolution or the emotional arc of this episode would be kind of Herb sort of realizing or blurting out, having a cathartic sort of tell-off of his dad. You were never there for me. You never cared about me. Yeah. And that being the kind of key emotional catharsis, and his father having to respond to that. But Herb's adoration of his father remains intact for the whole thing, right? That Herb talks to the other people, that he says, I could never live up to his impossible standard of excellence. And we see him as this, this cornball, shyster. But, But he's never brought down in Herb's eyes. Herb has the stars in his eyes from the beginning of the episode to the end.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of moments where maybe you start to see him realize a few things about him. But you're right, he never gives up the idea that he's based his whole identity on the things he found cool about his dad.
Yeah.
I think that happens a lot. I mean, I think sitcoms can go one of 2 ways. You can either have a parent who's like exactly the same, or the complete opposite, and they rebelled against them. But I think with an absent dad, that makes a lot of sense. It's like you're trying to mirror and reflect your dad to kind of bring him back home and say, hey, see, look, I want to be just like you. And it's even said so right at the end of the episode out loud. Herb tells his dad in a really touching moment, I'm a good salesman, Dad. And Herb's dad just kind of looks at him and goes, that's important to you, isn't it? Kind of almost surprised, like he didn't know,
Pop?
Yep.
I'm good.
What do you mean, son?
I can sell. Me, I can sell. I'm really pretty good.
That's important to you, being good.
You betcha.
You better listen to age, boy. This is a lesson I always learn.
What's that?
You better be good or they'll eat you alive.
Really?
No, I'm kidding you. Oh, no. Son.
Yes, sir.
Not that I'm saying I love you, but I love you.
Yeah, that he didn't know that what Herb really wants, the episode doesn't build to sort of, them saying I love you. Well, actually, Herb Sr. does say, I'm not saying I love you, but I love you. I don't say hug or anything, because there's a moment where Herb reaches out to touch his dad and then pulls his hands back.
Yeah.
But the real kind of emotional, when Herb reaches out emotionally, what it is he kind of softly says, I'm good, Dad, I can sell. And that's what he wants his dad to know. I actually do find that kind of touching, poignant, sort of sad, but yes. Herb Sr. sort of gives him the affirmation that Herb really needs. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if it's as much as Herb needs, but he certainly doesn't withhold it.
As you said, the typical way of doing this would be that cathartic moment where they realize everything's wrong. But I think there's a couple things keeping that from happening. One is the old existential trap we've talked about with respect to Andy. We wouldn't want Herb to lose his identity because that's part of what makes him funny,
Right.
He's not going to change midway through WKRP to become, throw away the polyester and start wearing organic blends. That's not going to happen. So that's the reason why he can't reject his dad. But you know what? What I found in this episode and the next one, I don't want to go too far ahead, but what I found is that underneath all of this stuff, that the bluster and the machismo and the salesmanship, Herb's really sensitive. He's a very, very sensitive guy with a lot of attitudes that maybe he had to kind of bury. And the key to this, Rob, was the salt and pepper shakers.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have retired.
No. You should have. I mean, you've been on the road all your life. Even as a kid, I remember you always being gone.
I always came back.
I know. You always brought me those salt and pepper shakers from wherever you'd been.
Because you collected them.
Still do.
I always found that a little strange, son.
You still bought them for me.
I still do. Look, you ready for these? These are beauties.
And I didn't remember this at all. As I said, I didn't remember this episode really well. But the fact that, when you do travel, you bring home stuff like a magnet or whatever. And Herb didn't want little toy soldiers. He didn't want historical memorabilia. He wanted salt and pepper shakers, a very domestic kind of object. Right. And, what is that but like a child's cry for dad to come home and put some salt and pepper on his eggs or something like that?
Yeah, what I mean? But it's also like a kind of classic tchotchke that Herb Sr. could find in all the different places. So Herb Sr.'s, sales trips probably to all these, kind of podunk towns all over the place in Little Herb's mind become this sort of exotic journey, and he's bringing back this cool stuff for him.
Yeah.
And Bert Parks, Herb Sr. says, yeah, I always thought that was weird. He shakes his head at it. And yet he has a set of salt and pepper shakers for Herb right then. He always thought it was weird, but he did do it.
Anyway, yeah.
I mean, a few salt and pepper shakers every year seems like a small substitute for a father's love. But if you think of it as the vehicle through which the two of them actually enact their love, it's a small thing, but it is a real thing. It is a thing, as we say.
Well, Malcolm, where have you been? You got to get in on this.
Dad, I want skating lessons.
Son, once you start, there's no going back.
I know.
This means total commitment. Once you begin the path, there is no leaving the path. Are you sure you're ready for that? I mean, really ready?
I guess so.
Neat. We'll start tomorrow. Come on, dig in before they harden.
I had said a little earlier the whole idea of the Herb's dad being from the wrong side of the tracks in one of those black and white sitcoms from the 50s.
Yeah.
There's definitely a change in how fathers are looked at. I mean, we can joke about the authoritarian 50s dad, but I mean, there were actual network notes and rules about what fathers were allowed to kind of say, do, and act like on those shows back in the 50s. Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and Ozzie and Harriet, I think, are probably even more iconic in some ways. So, that's the dad of the 50s. In the 60s and 70s, things start to change a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I don't know. I mean, these things are never, it's not clear cut, but I feel like there's a couple of ages of dads. And so, with our sitcom ages, that in the golden and silver, the golden age, you have the perfect dad, it's the patriarch, the perfect patriarch, Ward, Cleaver.
Yep.
The dad, Father Knows Best, the name of the show. Then, in the Silver Age, we talked about how there's sort of these domestic sitcoms with the kind of, with the wife has the magical powers. But I think that, clearly today, well, to the extent that I'm watching TV today, but, certainly 90s and 2000s, I think, is the age of the buffoon dad, right? Homer Simpson is the paradigmatic example, but everyone from, Al Bundy to Bryan Cranston on Malcolm in the Middle and, just like every kind of sitcom, that's the sort of standard, that dad is now a buffoon. And so, how do you get from kind of perfect dads of the 50s and the 80s, right? Bill Cosby, Alan Thicke and those guys. How do you get from those to the useless buffoon dads of the 90s?
Yeah, I mean, it gets me thinking about, there are these two branches of sitcoms, right? There's family sitcoms and workplace sitcoms, basically. And I think these days we have so many workplace sitcoms that we forget. In the early days of TV, I can't think of any workplace sitcoms. And I think what happened is there was a slow change of the it's the same stuff as the Rural Purge we talked about a few weeks ago. It's the idea that we want to bring in people who are young, people who are hip, and people who maybe don't have kids and families and houses in the suburbs anymore. So when you get to, an era like the 70s, you have kind of these two threads of TV reflecting the culture, but also TV being a little bit prescriptive about the culture. A show like The Brady Bunch is a classic 50s style sitcom.
Yeah.
But think about the way the family is formed.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's a combined family of Carol and Mike bringing in their children who become step siblings, which wouldn't have really flown in the 50s. What you're looking at there is this slow change in the culture that whole idea of an infallible dad is starting to fade into the recesses of history.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite TV? You're not a dad, so maybe you don't. I think about this all the time, but do you have any TV dads or?
Maybe not. I mean, that's what I was thinking about earlier is that, the age where I was being quote unquote raised by TV was the early to mid 80s, and it was stuff like WKRP and syndication that was repeating. Now, I did love the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
It was on all the time. So just by sheer sort of bombardment of Brady stories, did I become sort of this, very knowledgeable Brady scholar. But let me, So the idea, though, is I think that a lot of these syndicated sitcoms that were going into syndication right around the time I was watching a lot of TV were like WKRP. And I think that most of my favorite sitcoms growing up were these type of, catch as catch can, families thrown together by random circumstance instead of, by blood relations.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to give you some fatherly and wise advice at this time in your life. Listen up. If you're wondering if a boy is thinking about you, he's not. He's thinking about sex or he's hungry. Those are the only two options.
Are you trying
to
be
funny? No, I'm not
funny?
finished. Listen to me. Boys think about sex every single minute of the day. That's what they do. That's why they lie. They're going to leave you waiting around for them to call, and they won't call. They're going to be cruel, and they're going to be misleading. And your mother wanted me to add this, that by and large, football players are the worst offenders. However, I think that it pretty much crosses all lines.
You done?
You are beautiful, you are sensitive, you are sweet, and I don't want to see you get hurt.
Love you too, Dad.
You're a lousy ping pong player, though.
If I like the workplace sitcoms, I have to imagine you probably got some favorite family sitcoms.
Well, yeah, I don't know if they're sitcoms, but I certainly have some favorite TV dads. I think that just as a character, one of the great creations of human civilization is Homer Simpson. But I'm not thinking of him as a model dad. But as a dad watching TV, the buffoon dad is so ubiquitous that I do notice good dads on TV, and they're not usually in sitcoms, I guess. But if I was going to say sort of like my short list of like good dads on relatively modern TV, I could rattle them off very easily. I would say Louis C.K., who is like, that's interesting because he kind of is the buffoon dad, but it's like, okay, but then you sort of like the buffoon dad, but this super realistic kind of like portrait from inside, and you get, and that he really means well, and you sort of and he actually is a really good dad, even though he's a totally flawed sort of person, right? So
it's moderated a little bit by the fact that it's from the buffoon's point of view,
right? Exactly. So he is kind of like this, like he kind of inhabits and transcends that trope, right?
Yeah.
Then I think you do have to leave sitcom. So I would say Keith Mars on Veronica Mars.
Oh yeah.
And and probably the number one, and this is not original, but is Eric Taylor on Friday Night Lights. That's sort of like he's like the television dad. He's the dad to every lost boy in that town, but he's just like what would Coach Taylor do? That's on my wall when I'm trying to be dad.
Yeah, you got it. Good.
Tastes like a burger. I don't like you anymore.
So some random bits from the episode that we liked. We always like to try and throw a few of these in. Late in the episode, Herb Sr.'s hanging out in the booth with Venus and Johnny. So I hear this sort of opening bar of music, and I'm like, boy, that sounds super familiar.
Yeah, and suddenly you picture...
And then suddenly I picture a whole bunch of, young kids who are actually in their 40s dancing around a campfire at a summer camp.
Yeah,
exactly,
because it's the Wet Hot American Summer theme, which is the Jefferson Starship, right?
Yeah, it's Jane. It's from, again, I think 78 is when that album came out that... Johnny is looking at in the booth, and it was very strange. It was kind of like hearing the Star Wars theme a few weeks ago in WKRP. You're like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. What's that doing here? Any other bits that you enjoyed?
I think what they're doing in the booth is that when they're playing Liar's Poker.
So, how do we play this Liar's Poker again? Well, you see the registration numbers on that bill. You play it just like a poker hand, that's all. No kidding. Yeah.
And you can bluff?
Well, of course, that's the name of the game. If you think I'm lying, you call my bluff, but you better be right or I'll take your money, boy. Yeah. Okay.
That is, comes back around at the end, right, when Herb's got the exact same dollar bill
that the same
Herb Sr. used to win. That's awesome, yeah. But Herb's also expanded his scheme from a few weeks ago. So you remember we were talking about him betting his paycheck against Johnny's because he was on commission. Well, now he's got a whole complex kind of, Nigerian prince, Irish
he's like raffling off his paycheck, right?
And able to make more money than his paycheck evidently.
So does he have like 1,000 people? Because apparently the tickets are $1 each. So I don't know what his monthly pay is, but that he's got enough people that he can make a go of that. And of course we hear that Herb Sr. is doing exactly the same thing with his Social Security check at the home.
Yeah,
so it's another like father like son thing that that we see all through this. We see that. That Herb is his father's son, chasing after women, and then all these kind of low rent scams.
All the more touching that Herb Sr.'s seed money is the money that his son won on a grift.
Yeah.
It's the sub rosa, I'm a really good salesman thing. I'm also a pretty good con man as well. So
he's not actually a really good salesman.
No, I guess not. We've gone back and forth on this. I think again, the moment I knew that Herb was all hat and no cattle was that Dell's stereo deal that he.
That's like episode 3. So.
Yeah, I know. We knew it right then and there.
You think I'm sexy? Come on, baby, let me know. Morning, gals. How's this sound? Couple of shooters down at the cricket? then dinner.
Buzz off, Herb.
Don't like that? Okay, what about this? Hop into a pair of black leather skin tights and we go bowling in Kentucky. I love getting physical with you.
Get lost, Herb.
Body painting classes at the university. I paint you, you paint me, and it's all very respectable.
I'm a little confused here. Usually you come in, you ask me to dinner, I say buzz off, you say okay, fine, and that's it. Is there something wrong?
Wrong. Nothing's wrong. As a matter of fact, Lucille has taken the kids to her mother's, and for the next 10 days, Huggable Herb is on the loose and cruising.
Well, like we promised, it's wall-to-wall Herb this week. Our second episode is Put Up or Shut Up. And in this episode, I guess it starts with Herb's wife and kids. Lucille is out of town, and Herb is being more relentless than ever in his pursuit of Jennifer. Bailey comes up with the idea. Bailey suggests to Jennifer that Herb is all talk, and she suggests that Jennifer call Herb's bluff. So Jennifer agrees to go out on a date with Herb, and this episode is really the one where, you know, the whole Herb pursuing / harassing Jennifer storyline comes to a head.
That is so degrading. Why didn't you do something about that, Jennifer?
10 days.
I wouldn't stand for it.
I can't do 10 days.
You know what you ought to do?
What?
Just once. What do you suppose would happen if you said yes to Herb?
Bailey?
Nothing would happen.
Bailey, this is Herb Tarlek.
Who is all show and no go.
Bailey's idea, it's surprising Jennifer never tried it before, first of all, I thought.
Uh-huh.
But second of all, Bailey really just wants Jennifer to crush Herb. She's just like, you know, you do this and he'll never bother you again. And she starts to get really angry and everything else. And then she's so contrite when he actually does call her bluff. And she has to realize, well, I never really tried it. I only heard it worked from other
that's
people.
right. No, she says, so there's no shy Bailey here. But also I think it's significant that, you know, this is more of the Jennifer-Bailey friendship. And
Yes.
So when Jennifer and Bailey are alone, you know, that maybe this is how Bailey is when she's, you know, just with Jennifer or whatever. But yeah, Bailey says, oh, if you call a bluff's bluff, he'll fold right away. I've done it dozens of times, she said. And then later, well, I thought it would work. Yeah, it's a nice reversal there, and made all the better by Jennifer's, you know, sort of slow burn or like the panic in Lonnie Anderson's eyes. You know, we've said before, as with Andy, flustered Jennifer is better than has everything under control Jennifer, and there's some good flustered, freaked out Jennifer in this episode.
Oh, I love that line. I can't do 10 days. I can't do it. So Herb comes up with some, you know, a rapid fire set of 3 possible dates.
Oh, that's right. So yeah, we get a nice look at, Herb's thought about this, and he is, you know, he's ready to go. It's not just dinner and a movie. He's ready to go with a bunch of great ideas. You want to say what?
Well, I mean, which of these would you know, hypothetically, if you were to go on a date with Herb Tarlek, I mean, would you choose the shooters at the cricket? You want to go across the river and go bowl in Kentucky?
Bowling in Kentucky.
Or, you know, there's body painting at the university. I think it was the university. Yep. It's like, you know, Herb can paint Jennifer, Jennifer can paint Herb. It's all very respectful.
Very respectful. No, he's got a bunch of good ideas.
He knows what's going on in the greater Cincinnati area.
He's read like whatever the Cincinnati Alt Weekly and found
exactly.
a bunch of shooters at the cricket. That means drinking shooters at the cricket is some kind of watering hole.
Maybe that's another name for Snooki's down the street, the Ohio Tavern.
Is it maybe a step up from Snooki's? Is it?
Maybe that's the Fern Bar that they went to last season.
Oh, the one time that they went out when
Jennifer and Lucille
went out. That's quite possible. That's right. Bowling in Kentucky. I mean, it sounds like a euphemism, but yeah.
The bowling's better in Kentucky. Everybody knows that, obviously. Yeah, the body painting, it had to be the university, if I'm remembering it correctly. That's that's totally what would pique Herb's interest. I bet you in the early 60s when Herb was in college, he really liked those foreign films, you know what I mean? Taking dates to like an Ingmar Bergman film, expecting it to be really, really erotic, and then all of a sudden his date's like, why am I watching 3 hours of existential dread on screen?
That's right. Well, yeah, because Herb wants to be, especially, you know, he wants to impress Jennifer, so he wants to come up with something that is simultaneously classy and yet sexy, erotically charged. And so that's the perfect.
And that explains the bowling.
And that also, I was talking about bowling. Yeah, what were you talking about?
Well, Lester, I guess it's time for Herbie to hit the old glory trail. It's going to be some night. Tonight, history is going to be made. Tomorrow, I am a legend.
The plot of the episode is pretty direct. It's pretty A to B. We're going to get to Herb and Jennifer's date eventually. In between, though, there is this whole sense that Jennifer's like, he's not going to follow through. He's not going to follow through. And she has, as you say, that flustered revelation when it finally comes down to the night they're going to have to go out. Of course, the funny part of this is that once Herb gets to Jennifer's apartment, he's flustered and he can't.
Well, first of all, it's a double bluff because
yes, exactly.
She calls his bluff, but then, and we'll talk about this in a minute, thanks to Les Nessman's sneaky snooper, Herb finds out that she's bluffing, and so he's calling her bluff, and so we have a collision course for comedy.
I know something you don't know, but you probably wouldn't be interested since I found it out with my sneaky snooper.
Oh, no. What is it?
The whole thing is a bluff to scare you away from Jennifer.
Bluff?
Mm-hmm. This afternoon, I overheard Jennifer tell Bailey she had no intention of seeing your date through to its logical, albeit slightly unseemly, conclusion.
I don't believe it.
She intends to see to it that you're the one to back down.
Hmm?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got news for the little blonde lady up front. HT is in for the duration.
That sneaky snooper, I mean, what a central point to the plot. I mean, you could not have spent your $14.95 better than to send off to Battle Creek, Michigan for a jam jar with an antenna attached to it. Fantastic.
This is quite a place you got here, Jenny.
Thank you.
Fireplace functional?
No.
That's your piano.
Yes, it is.
Black.
I know.
Most pianos you see nowadays are brown. You play?
No.
Good.
So we get to Jennifer's apartment, as we've talked about before, Rob. It's a center for a lot of really, really funny hijinks in the show. But this time it's fairly dramatic what happens. There's a lot of comedy at the beginning, but Herb and Jennifer finally come to some kind of agreement about what's going on between the two of them.
That's right. I found this. Well, I went back and forth. This was tough to watch. I mean, in a good way, but I was cringing, definitely. And I felt like I was watching a modern 21st century cringe comedy as they both, inch towards this romantic consummation that neither of them really wanted. Because this is the key that, in fact, Bailey was right. Herb doesn't really want to cheat on Lucille, and he doesn't really want to score with Jennifer. He feels obliged to. He says at one point, I thought about this and I thought about this, and what does he say? I said, and I have to do it, or something like that.
Yeah.
That he feels obliged to. So as they inch towards this, even though he knows she's bluffing, he's determined to call her bluff, but he's getting the sweats and he's hyperventilating. And
should I sit on the couch or the chair?
Doesn't matter. Are you okay?
There was a lot of tenderness in both of Lonnie Anderson and Frank Bonner's eyes as they kind of come to that realization, kind of mutually, that they actually care for each other, but just as friends. And I don't know, it seemed to me like all that cringing I was also doing at the beginning of that scene kind of just faded away in this sort of relief and goodwill of the two of them kind of coming to this realization that they're both on this collision course towards something neither of them want at all.
I'm not doing this very well, am I, Jennifer?
You're doing just fine.
Oh, no, I'm not. Damn. I want to be so cool about this tonight, but I can't. I mean, I fantasized about how this whole night would be. I mean, it was so nice. You were you and I was, I don't know, somebody else saying and doing all the right things instead of hyperventilating and sweating. I'm sorry, perspiring.
Herb, don't put yourself down. I mean, these things either work out naturally or they don't. We just don't have the right chemistry.
No. It's my fault. I'm so stupid.
No, it's not you. It's us. I bet you're pretty suave around your wife.
Sure, of course.
See? That's why that relationship works.
Look, I'd rather not talk about my wife if you don't mind.
Why not?
I feel a little guilty.
Don't. We're just two good friends getting together for a few drinks.
Yeah?
Yes.
Well, it's not so bad.
You think so?
Heck no. I mean, sometimes, I just like to be with a woman, without pulling anything.
Then why don't you take me out to dinner?
I'd be delighted.
My wrap is in the bedroom.
Okay, fine.
They get that out in the open and sort of acknowledge it. And yeah, it's kind of a remarkably, it sounds funny to say grown up or mature resolution for such a, inane 70s sexual harassment plotline. But
right.
It's probably the best possible resolution to this whole thing. And it's handled very well.
I think it's no coincidence that it's at this point, as we enter the 80s and we're kind of midway through the sitcom, that they abandon a old form of humor that, again, like you say, isn't really mature. It isn't really sort of even up to the speed of 1980, and replace it with something a little bit more thoughtful. I don't know if it's a case of them necessarily doing a similar thing like they've done with Venus in season 2 and beyond, where they're trying to make up for lost miscues or past miscues rather. But maybe there is something to the fact that they realize that having Herb constantly sort of chase after Jennifer like a wolf in a cartoon, it isn't really the best way to, put together an ensemble comedy like this.
Yeah, that's right, because this episode really does kind of wrap up the Herb Jennifer stuff. They'll make a joke, they'll make an occasional gag again. He will continue to make sort of, funny joke gestures, but it's almost like they both now understand that he is kidding. And so they never really return to this. And in fact, this episode was actually written and filmed early in the season. It's something like the third episode made this season. We talk about the show not being serialized, but generally, but they held this episode back until they had aired all the other episodes from the season where Herb was hitting on Jennifer, so that once this aired, from this point on, we don't have that plot line. And so they actually were paying attention somewhat to, okay, this is going to resolve all the Herb Jennifer stuff, so let's put it here at whatever, we're at the 13th episode of the season or whatever. So having these two episodes back to back really, I think, shines a light on Herb's psyche, on Herb's psychology, or at least it kind of demands that we think about it and talk about it. And even though I like this episode a lot more than Herb's Dad, having watched Herb's Dad right before Put Up or Shut Up works in a lot of ways. It kind of explains why it is that Herb feels obliged to pursue Jennifer, even though in fact he does not want to cheat on Lucille and he does not want to consummate this, is that he is trying to be Herb Sr. He's trying to be his dad, and he sees this is how a man behaves. And
that's the key, right? They're all tied up. The salesmanship, the being able to bed beautiful women, it's all tied up in this idea. Yeah, and the suits, and polyester, right? Polyester. They're all part of a large sort of woven together thread. When you bring Herb Sr. in and you start thinking about what Herb Jr. was missing growing up and his dad being on the road, as we talked about, he's aspiring to this ideal of masculinity where it's, Papa was a Rolling Stone. And when you have that kind of anxiety about a father who's not present and you try to start emulating them to kind of bring them back, it explains a lot about how Herb, at root, a really sensitive guy, I think. I think that's kind of my theory, is that Herb was a quiet, kind of lonely kid who didn't have a father figure around, And when his father figure did come into town, he was laden with these symbols of potency and masculinity.
Yeah, or what Herb took to be symbols of. Yeah, that's the thing is that Herb idolizes him, and even though very few other people would. Yeah.
Exactly. And so you end up with someone who, layers on a sort of sensitive core this set of performative, kind of masculinity sort of symbols. And it goes back to what we talked about in the season debut for season 2 when Herb gives that really incredible date advice, and then, just says, well, then you get her drunk, and it's the essential contradiction right there. It's like he's a sexual harasser who actually really loves his wife. And, why is he performing to these levels of being a Mad Men era sort of skirt chaser around the office? It's because of what he lost as a kid. I mean, we've been very forgiving to people for their foibles in this show. The big guy, Les, we've talked about all of their upbringings and what we think maybe their psychology is. But, Herb's right in that bucket. He's another one of these, people sort of, influenced by an upbringing that he can't escape, essentially. Or, about things that happened early in his life that he can't forget.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we have to, withhold judgment or embrace sexual harassment.
Right.
That's not what we're saying. But you get it. You understand where it comes from. It makes sense.
Yes.
And this is something we said way back even in the pilot, is that this show is, it's a zany, goofy show. In some ways, it's not deep at all. And yet, over time, these characters do achieve a level of depth. And here in these 2 episodes, we really, deepen what we know about Herb Tarlek.
It's one of the reasons why I really like this show as opposed to any number of other sitcoms from the 1970s is that they thought about these things with respect to their characters. And, that might be an MTM thing. Bob Newhart was a psychiatrist, you know what I mean? This sort of like this specter of therapy is kind of hovering over the entire sort of MTM set of shows, is that why are the people on sitcoms so wacky, right? Why are they so zany? Well, if you start looking at it in a realistic way, you start realizing that they've got lives that they live outside of that 3-walled studio set that you have to kind of bring in if you want to be true to these people as characters. And, people are starting to think about the family structure. They're starting to think about things like office-based sexual harassment jokes. Are they funny? Are they not funny? Why aren't we finding them funny anymore? What does this mean? And, again, I'm not saying that Herb's Dad and Put Up or Shut Up are some kind of like, conscious, deliberate sort of examination of, male privilege or patriarchy, but they're reflective of their time,
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about Herb's relationship with his dad, but another piece of this, I think, just looking forward to a couple of other episodes, is that Herb is a dad. And so it's interesting to think about that chain of what we pass on from our fathers to our children, to our sons, to our children. One of my favorite episodes, I'll see how I feel when we watch it. I haven't watched it yet, but one of my favorite episodes that's coming up down the road is Frog Story.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, I remember it as a very touching episode about Herb as a father to his daughter.
Yes.
And then, of course, there's Real Families, where we have a fair bit about, I think they call him Herb Jr., but really I guess we have to call him Herb III.
Yeah, just to help with the confusion, right? But maybe he's Herb Jr. Jr. Maybe that's the way Herb decides to name his child. But the thing about Herb III in that episode of Real Families, he doesn't have a lot of lines. He's just a sort of a kid actor. He's always hanging on to this doll, and Herb wants him to not be holding on to it while the cameras are on.
Right.
I think he's again, unconsciously and inadvertently repeating this entire cycle of, you can't be a sensitive kid. You've got to, stop playing with dolls and start doing sports. And there's actually a scene about that in Real Families.
When my friend William was 5 years old, he wanted a doll to hug and hold.
A doll,
said William,
is what I need to wash and clean and dress and feed. A doll to give a bottle to and put to bed when day is through. And any time my doll gets ill, I'll take good care of it,
said my friend Bill.
A doll, William wants a doll. Don't be a sissy, said his best friend did. Why should a boy want to play with a doll? Dolls are for girls, said his cousin Fred.
Did you have Free to Be Me, You and Me when you were a kid?
No, but it looms large because I think that I was born right after that came out, right? Whereas you would have been born a couple of years before. I don't know. Was it 73?
I just looked it up. So it came out in 72. So we absolutely
72.
had it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I identified with Herb the Third because I did have a couple of doll-style dolls when I was his age. Because again, remember I mentioned in the earlier episode, I think Herb Jr. is my age, right? I think he looked about 4 or 5 in Real Families. Yeah, I think that there was a lot of changing in how people reared their kids in this, again, post-60s.
Yeah.
And there were guides like Free to Be You and Me, and there were all kinds of different kinds of children's education going on as well, meant to inculcate some different values than had been, done previously.
Yeah, there was. Some of the ones I remember. So I had Free to Be You and Me, and I remember some of them very clearly. There was the song about William wants a doll, or there's a story about William wants a doll. William wants a doll. Oh, there was a song called "It's All Right to Cry," sung by Rosie Greer, by a football player, right?
Yeah.
And
that's the classic. That's the one I remembered actually.
Yeah. I don't think I ever wanted a doll, but I do remember it was meaningful to me, the kind of like the message of just even as a little kid, sort of like "It's All Right to Cry" was meaningful to me because I cried as a kid sometimes, and like that was actually reassuring that existed.
Yeah, I can imagine. I come unfortunately from a very emotional and operatic Italian family, so everyone cries all the time.
No. The Canadian Scots Canadian wasps need to be told that it's all right to cry.
It's okay to cry.
You can't repeat it enough.
It's all right to cry. Crying gets the sad out of you. It's all right to cry. It might make you feel better. Raindrop from your eyes, washing all the mad out of you. Raindrop from your eyes, it's gonna make you feel better.
So as we spend all this time psychoanalyzing Herbert R. Tarlek, and Herb is, probably maybe even more than less, Herb is routinely the butt of jokes on this show and is the jerk, is the antagonist in the early days. And yet, are there not ways in which Herb actually is cool? And certainly there are moments in which there's sort of a poetry to his motion and and he, because Bonner is so good. I talked about just the way he picked up the phone in the Carlson for President episode.
And I talked about when he was at the singles bar and he sent Lucille the drink and he spun around in those singles bar chairs, you know? I mean, I'll never be that cool, right?
Yes, there's a way in which his conviction to the bit, sometimes he actually does become cool, or it really seems that way to me. And there's a couple of those in here. I think that, he's got that great leather jacket. And it is a great leather jacket. That's sort of...
It is, but I know a bunch of my relatives have one just like that. I associate it with looking a little bit shady and like, it's a good jacket. It's a decent jacket.
And the way that he sort of swirls it, he spins it onto his shoulders is a great move. I think at the end of the episode, he spins his jacket on inside out onto his shoulders.
And it's not the same jacket either, so it doesn't look as cool, But yeah, if you want your jacket to look cool, the one thing you always learn, you leave those arms out, you just drape it over your shoulders. All of a sudden, you got a cape.
You got a cape. You got yourself a cape, 70s man cape. His date outfit, right? He's wearing like he's wearing like an ascot, and
I think he stole Les's outfit from when Les went on the date with Jennifer.
Right.
He figured Les was successful on his date. I'll wear the same kind of thing he wore.
Yeah.
Herb goes the extra mile, as he said in For Love or Money, he will treat you to the fancy things on your date.
Is that wine?
Bag of wine.
Thank you. Why, Herb, this is a really fine French wine.
Is it? No, I told the guy to give me the best he's got in the store without going over $14.
$13.99.
A $13.99 bottle of wine.
Yeah.
He was going to go right up to $14. That was his limit. But that's a $42 bottle of wine in 2015. So.
Yeah, that's right. You hear that now and you think, oh, he's buying her a cheap bottle of wine. But it's not a cheap bottle of wine. That's a nice bottle of wine.
I can count on one hand the number of times I've spent $42.86 on a single bottle of wine in my life.
Yeah.
And they were probably all having to do with my wedding. So I was like, I feel for you, Herb. When I go to a wine shop, I have no idea what to ask for either.
So you just go right up to go right up without going over. It's like The Price is Right.
Exactly.
And then he has a great Frank Bonner moment after the sort of mature, touching resolution of all this. Jennifer kisses Herb on the cheek, and Bonner looks at the camera and just cocks one eyebrow, gives this sort of like great like just like to signal that that he is still Herb and he's still capable of missing the point, and like leaving the door open for for more of this behavior.
Mail call.
Oh, my package is here.
Battle Creek, Michigan, Les?
It's my sneaky snooper. It's a non-electronic listening device.
So the other thing that I think we both really liked from this episode was the role that Les played. And and the role of the aforementioned sneaky snooper, which, again, if you're watching that when you're 10 years old, that's just going to be the one thing you remember, and it's the one thing I remember from this episode, is I had forgotten about the antenna, the extendable antenna, which, if obviously you want your sneaky snooper to work, according to the specs, you've got to extend the antenna when you are listening at the door with the tumbler.
Yeah,
right?
And they're not afraid to do a little, phallic humor there, right? With extending the sneaky snooper and
and Les was talking about, I've been on a few dates, never any problems, never any complaints, and he's extending out the antenna.
Yeah, and just that Les is so excited, it's coming in the mail. It's something from Battle Creek, Michigan. Is a lovely little detail.
When I heard Battle Creek, Michigan, I think you and I. It's amazing we went to the same place, right? Because we're thinking about the history of what was made in Battle Creek, Michigan, and what was shipped out to the country from Battle Creek, Michigan.
Yeah. So Battle Creek it's the cereal city. It's the world headquarters of Kellogg, and it was basically the Kellogg brothers back at the turn of the century. If you ever read the T.C. Boyle novel or saw the movie Road to Wellville, that Will and John Harvey Kellogg kind of invented cold breakfast cereal as part of a turn-of-the-century health sanitarium movement. And John Kellogg had the Battle Creek Sanitarium, and Will Kellogg created cornflakes or whatever, and as a way of it was this great progressive era pseudoscience that eating egg and meat for breakfast would stir up all sorts of degenerate energies in you, but if you wanted to be kind of pure and healthy, you would eat these dried flakes of grain. And so that's the kind of middle class health imperative of the progressive era. And then so as a result of cereal, I don't know if it's connected, but Battle Creek then also is kind of like a place where you send away for crappy little plastic things, right? Things in the back of comic books, like the Foot Locker with 1,000 army men.
Kids, here's the greatest, the neatest, the latest thing. 5,000-piece fightin' Men and Monster set, some pieces not included. Astonish and baffle your friends and foes while you pulverize Japan. Here's what you get. 500 Japanese light infantry body parts may not be missing. 36 helpless officials, 20 tanks, 15 recoilless rifles not in the set. 24 bazooka gun runners, 18 ambulance chasers, 12 jet fighters, 6 not included. 16 helicopter parts, 200 shooting crouchers, 19 fighting clowns, 8 deserters, 6 Kisalean, 24 Mohawk Indians, and much, 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 much more.
That explains it. That explains why the audience was able to recognize that as a laugh line, and why we're prepared for the sneaky snooper to come out and not look anything like it looked in its ad, and just be a jar with an antenna stuck on the side of it.
Another one of those days, huh?
You, see anybody over there in that corner?
Nope.
Neither do I.
Are you okay, man?
Yeah, sure, fine. No, something weird is happening.
What is Johnny doing this entire episode, Rob?
Yeah. So, I don't know. Again, this is one of those B plots that doesn't quite make it to B. It's maybe a C or a D plot. It gets a few little bits. But, for some reason, Johnny is having full-on acid flashbacks.
So much for the coded references. Although, I have a theory, Rob, which is that maybe the mainstream audience might not have gotten the acid flashback reference in 1980.
They don't say acid. They don't say LSD. But, I mean...
That covers them. That definitely covers them.
But what is he doing? He sees people hiding in the corners, and he's like tripping out, looking at his hand. And
Did you ever really get into your hand, man? I mean, all those lines. It's like a tiny expressway. Your thumb is an off-ramp.
Have you ever noticed that your hand is like what is it? That your thumb is the off-ramp of your hand?
Yeah. It's like there's all these routes on here. It's amazing. So how creative do you have to be to get a drug reference past the censors?
I think Howard Hessman even tells a story where he says that he would spend all this time arguing with the network censors about what drug references he could get into the show, and then he'd go smoke a joint with them. And
oh my God!
So the point is that they knew, that everybody knew, but the name of the game was plausible deniability. The name of the game was sort of like, not that you can't mention it, but that you have to be able to say later, oh, that's not what we meant.
It's so interesting. I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, but doesn't it remind you of all the gay coding that went on with like Charles Nelson Riley and like Paul Lynde, and like they could be confirmed bachelors and they could have these, sort of personal mannerisms that everybody would know, but nothing was ever said. It was always on that lower level. That was sort of like, again, it was like a coded message essentially to the cognoscenti in the audience.
Yeah. Sure. And you could even be nostalgic for that. You could even miss that, the sort of the days when you had to play those games. But think about that 70s show. But a decade later, 2 decades later, like you can see the smoke. And you just can't see below their shoulder levels to see what is causing the smoke. Like that's such a strange level of
propriety. Right?
To hold it at that level, to go this far but not farther.
I had about 17 hours straight sleep. I think I'm seeing what I'm supposed to see.
Don't go changing. Try and please me.
You've never let me down before.
You were terrific last night.
You too.
Thanks for the drinks.
My pleasure.
I just wanted someone to talk to. I like you just the way you are.
The end of the episode is fantastic. The sort of credits and post-credits stinger. It's a classic morning after joke, right?
Yes.
Herb and Jennifer come in and they're almost lovey-dovey with each other.
Almost lovey-dovey, and they sing to one another. We've never seen them behave in this way together, so it really is delightful.
Yeah, and they have a great duet of Billy Joel's Just the Way You Are.
Don't go changing, yeah.
So, Billy Joel, what can be said? I mean, probably a perfect artist. I don't think we've actually heard a Joel record in the studio, on the air at all. But my God, talk about an artist's golden period.
Yes.
This WKRP period is peak Billy Joel.
It is.
Just the Way You Are was a big hit a couple of years before this episode aired. I think fall of '77. It came off the Stranger album. I know a lot about Billy Joel because my late grandmother, God rest her soul, was the world's biggest Billy Joel fan.
Oh, really? Oh, that's...
Every album, saw him live multiple times. And, it's funny. I've been reading a lot about him. There's a classic Chuck Klosterman essay about how Billy Joel is kind of willfully uncool, sort of doesn't realize he's being uncool, but is being uncool, and doesn't somehow get rehabilitated into cool by doing that. He's still uncool. And I tend to agree with that. Klosterman makes a great comparison between Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen. Here are two artists who talk about the same stuff, right? Blue-collar workers, not doing as well as your dad did, factories closing down, that blue-collar ethnic kind of Jersey, tri-state kind of thing.
Yeah, very similar world.
But Bruce Springsteen is idolized and he's lionized and he is this, Hall of Fame rock and roll kind of person. And Billy Joel's kind of looked at as cheesy, square, dated, whatever you want. I mean, part of it is just they work in different idioms. Like Bruce Springsteen's solidly rock and roll. It's 1970s blue-collar rock through and through. Billy Joel, he'll do a Torch song, he'll quote a jazz, solo.
Yeah.
He'll throw in all kinds of stuff that, he grew up listening to, Tin Pan Alley type stuff that doesn't translate into that level of cool. So I love Billy Joel. I think I always say, he wrote songs about factories closing 2 years before Born in the USA came out and all this other stuff. He was on the cutting edge of these kind of things, but he's a great artist for this Carter Reagan, ethnic blue collar moment that we've been talking about in this podcast.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know the Klosterman piece you're talking about, and it's a great piece. And of course, that's one of Chuck Klosterman's superpowers, is to really think super hard and make you think hard about art and artists that we often think of as sort of disposable, right?
Yeah.
And someday, I know we keep putting it off, but we're going to have the big disco conversation on this show. And I'm conflicted because, what you're saying about Springsteen versus Joel, we need to be suspicious of the kind of received hagiography of rock authority and rock credibility, where there's a sort of, where basically Rolling Stone magazine and a handful of baby boomers have picked, the sort of straight line of the people who have cred and the people whose music is good. And then there's the stuff that there's the stuff that has no credibility. And I totally think we need to be suspicious of that. And, the whole disco sucks thing and all the kind of subterranean classism and sexism and racism that's in there, and the sort of snobbery that says, Bruce Springsteen has credibility and Billy Joel is a hack. And, Klosterman humorously quotes some of Springsteen's more hacky lyrics in that essay. I think he says, what's the line? Strap your arms around my velvet rims and your legs across.
Yeah, around my engines. Yeah.
It's that is a cheesy line. But so we have to be suspicious of all that. And yet, to me, Bruce Springsteen is a serious artist and Billy Joel is a doofus.
Well, that's all for Hold My Odor Terrible Dresser Forever. Seriously, if we can't get into a fight about hoodlum rock that's going to cancel the pod, I think we'll weather Springsteen versus Joel. I think
we'll weather it.
I might be as crazy as you say. If we're crazy, then it's true that it's all because of you, and you wouldn't want me any other way. You may be right, I may be crazy, oh, but it just may be a lunatic you're looking for. It's too late to fight, it's too late to change. You may be wrong,
Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
We're online at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which, believe it or not, wasn't taken. We're also available on iTunes, and we always appreciate your iTunes subscriptions, reviews, ratings, and downloads. So get on there and give us some stars.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
If you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.